Doctor,
Well,
April 21st.
okay, thank you, Ed.
We made it through tax day. Everybody got their extension phone.
Yeah. That's right.
We're still attempting to get information from both Delmar and, actually it's Delmar, but we're trying to get information from the attorneys as well. And let's focus on the stuff that you and I have been attempting to get from Delmar for, it's getting close to 2 years.
Right.
And it's not like it's complicated, because it's not.
Well, I guess it depends on who you are. I should say that.
If you've got an accounting system,
Right.
it has supporting documents, and you should be able to go to the file door and get them.
Right.
And, you know, people may think that we're pressing this too hard, and I want to explain some things, and we don't have many facts. So let's talk about, theoretically, what might be going on. We see hundreds of thousands of dollars of taxpayer-supported entities not paying Delmar the debt they owe them.
Right.
The debt's recorded on Delmar's books. They're audited financial statements. And literally hundreds of thousands of dollars. And we have, through Public Information Act, we've gone from the audited financial statements back to the trial balance.
Right.
Now, that little step almost cost us $26.7 million. But we were able, with some help from outside people, we were able to get around that and pay zero for it.
Right.
So we got the trial balance for 7 general ledger entries, 7 accounts, and all related to bad debts. And then we went further and asked for the support for the journal entries, because we identified some journal entries.
Right.
And then we found, well, an example is Texas A&M Kingsville, $54,000.
Right. And we still don't know.
We don't know, and Channel 6 has gone down there, and they were real open when they went down there the first time, and something's happened. They're not nearly as receptive any longer. So, and we found other ones, like the Council of Governments, $89,000.
Yeah.
And now that's not a public entity in that it's not owned by the public. That is some kind of taxpayer-supported entity. It's not a taxing agency,
Right.
but it derives its funds, as nearly as we can tell, it gets its funds from tax-supported entities. So I wrote them a PIA 6 months ago or so, and there was no response. So I've written another one, I have it here, and with that, I've got a duplicate. I've got all the support behind it, because that was part of that $185,750.64 that we found on our initial visit when you filed your first PIA related to the bad debt write-off. So I'm enclosing a copy of first the April 21st letter, that's today, and then a copy also of the last letter I wrote, or the first letter, and a copy of the letter that I'm sending to the Attorney General for clarification. The first letter was written August 1st, 2014.
Right.
The Attorney General has been very receptive to our concerns here, because we've had many concerns, beginning with that $26.7 million quote, and they were very receptive. We accomplished a lot with their help and others, but I haven't heard a thing from Council of Governments. So we're going to try it one more time and attach the detailed support behind that Delmar had, that we found on the first visit when you had that 5-foot stack of paper.
Yeah.
AR, third-party receivables to be written off. Council of Government, $89,073.50. That's a lot of money.
And that's a lot of money. I don't know how they could owe Delmar College that much money.
Well, I don't either, but they could, but I don't know why they would owe it and not pay it.
Yeah.
And we've got others, many others like that, similar to that. But why are we concerned about taxpayer-supported entities not paying Delmar? And let me tell you why I'm concerned. We don't know that they didn't pay. In fact, Verizon's listed on that. That list is being written off, and all the documentation that we've received and all that Channel 6 received says Verizon paid their bill.
Mm-hmm.
And then it was supported by a standby letter of credit, which is a negotiable instrument.
Right.
It's almost like having a check.
Mm-hmm.
You have to take it to the bank, but they will pay. So my question is, how could it be written off if in fact all the records say it was paid? And then another concern I've got, we went back, there were $2.838 million of receivables, accounts receivables,
Mm-hmm.
written off over a 7-year period.
Right.
And we went back and a sizable number, a 6-digit amount, was actually attributed to taxpayer entities,
Mhm.
taxpayer supported entities.
Right.
So my concern is twofold. If the taxpayer supported entity isn't paying their bill, why not?
Right.
And then, based on some of the things I've seen, it may be that the accounting system's not like a premier accounting system.
Right.
There's a couple of memos in there that document an accounting conversion in 2010,
Mm-hmm.
and things didn't go well.
No, which it should have been cured right there on the spot, as far as I'm concerned.
Well, with my background,
Yeah.
I would have stopped dead in my tracks,
Right.
cranked up the old system, and said, let's figure out how to work this thing before we do it again.
Right.
But they, well, stuff just disappeared.
Well,
Assets were gone.
well,
And
that's what bothers me is, you know, if somebody to stand up and say, hey, you know, here's the mistake, this is where we made it, and this is how it was made, then that would be one thing. But just to keep throwing roadblock after roadblock in front of us trying to figure it out, that's what piques my interest, I guess.
and another thing, we got another memo from that $2.838 million, and that what appears to be an accounting clerk wrote to the controller and said, there's been no activity on it. I went, I couldn't find any supporting documents, so I guess we need to write it off. And that was like $100,000.
Wow.
Now, it's my experience that, and years of experience, decades of experience, that accounting systems all have a trail. Right? A paper trail, a computer trail, there's always a trail.
Right.
If somebody owes Delmar money, it's because there's a source document that says you enrolled in a course, you provided a grant to somebody. There's a source document.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll tell you what, if there's not a source document, if they go to the file drawer and it's not there, but they've got it on their subledger, I think I'd pick the phone up and call them.
That's right.
Say, hey guys, I've got $100,000 on my books here that says you owe it. Do you know why it's not been paid?
Right.
Maybe you get a check, but based on the memo that I saw,
Mm-hmm.
what she did was open the file drawer, I couldn't find it, and recommend they write it off.
Right. Well, the thing that is a bother also is that when we asked for all the supporting documents, that they had done exactly what the CFO indicated in a workshop, that they had exhausted all means and methods and you know, whatever, to collect that debt from these people that they wrote off. And those documents were not presented to us, even though they were asked for. Okay? Not a single return receipt card, the green card from the U.S. Postal Service, no letters of request, no legal
No lawsuits.
No
We
lawsuits
specifically asked for all lawsuits related to accounts receivable. We got all lawsuits, zero. They said there were none. $2.838 million in 7 years, you don't sue anybody?
Yeah, that's a lot of money, folks. And you know whose pocket that came out of, don't you? Yours and mine.
Doc, while we're on this, I want to explain what accounts receivable lapping is.
Okay.
Okay, now, there's a lot of money going through that college, about $90 million a year, just on the operating budget. So we've got a lot of money going through. And like any entity, if somebody owes money and they pay cash, and somebody else owes money and they pay a check, if you lap those accounts receivable, apply that check to the cash account and take the cash and go home with it. Now, that's a standard accounts receivable lapping. We don't have any idea if that occurred here or not, because we can't get any records. But that's the standard accounts receivable lapping. In fact, I've sent a letter to the state auditor's office and asked them if maybe Delmar was a victim of that.
Yeah.
We can't find out. Maybe they can. They've got a lot of qualified people there. And I've attached documentation from their files, including their memo saying that things didn't go so well. Our general ledger didn't balance with our sub-ledger. You know, little things that would interest a CPA and a certified fraud auditor, certified fraud examiner. So they would find that interesting.
I hope so.
They will. Now, you know, we've had better luck with the state agencies than we have with the local ones.
Okay.
But accounts receivable lapping goes on every day. People get rich off it.
Yeah. Well, I don't feel like that the taxpayers need to be supporting activities like that if we find out this happened.
Yeah,
I just want to know, you know, hopefully it doesn't, folks. I'm not after blood over there or anything else. I just want to know what's going on. And, you know, my vested interest in it is taxpayer number one. That's my money and my kids' money and so forth, my family's money. And then as president of the Corpus Christi Taxpayers Association, there are an awful lot of people involved, as is Ed, who are in that membership that want to know what in the world's going on with their tax money.
And that's interesting because the administration cost over there has just ballooned up in recent years, while the instructional expense, the money paid for instructors, has gone down. So the percentage has changed. So you would think with the higher cost of administration, you'd have a higher quality of work product.
Right.
And what I'm finding in these memos does not, in my opinion, represent a real high quality of work product.
No, not at all. I think it went from just slightly under 60%, 6-7 years ago, the budget went to instruction. And then now it's 60-something%?
I think it switched.
Yeah, it did. Okay, so we had, and 7 years ago, 60% of the budget went for instructional, and the rest of it was for administration and running the college. And now the instructional is down to 38%, and that means the rest of it's up 60-some-odd%. So it shifted within that range.
Another interesting aspect is that during the last 5 years or so, the student enrollment's gone down about 18%.
Yeah.
One of the few schools in Texas that has had the decline in enrollment.
Right.
So enrollment's going down, costs are going up,
Yeah.
and administrative costs are taking a much larger section of that pie.
Right.
So that's bothersome. That's bothersome to me. We're not having much success getting any documentation. It's been nearly 2 years, and
Well, it's been a slow, painful process, that's for sure.
and those 10-day letters, when they cross that 100-day mark, that's really odd.
Yeah.
But we've communicated that to the Attorney General as well. Did you want to say anything else on our progress there?
No, I'm just very curious to find out what is causing these accounting irregularities, as we call it.
When the subledger doesn't equal the general ledger, that's not a regular item.
No.
That's your accounting 201 or 231, whatever that first course is. But apparently we had some problems over there.
Yeah.
And I want to see the documentation.
Yeah, well, I'm not giving up, and I know you're not, so.
No, and we're going to a higher level. We don't know what the result's going to be.
Right.
Now, we've been attempting, actually you've been attempting to get some correspondence from the attorneys. You'd like to get an update on the attorney's activities,
Right.
because that's a big number.
Yep.
It's always been a big number at Del Mar,
Mm-hmm.
and we want to make sure that, well, we can't make sure of anything. We would like to feel comfortable that Del Mar is not going to get like the city of Corpus Christi and spend $2.5 million with one law firm
Right.
in Austin in a year.
Mhm.
So these numbers are huge. I've not seen, attorneys are necessary, but I've not seen any real productivity from an attorney.
Well, it's all, let's cover this up, let's stall the taxpayers out when they request the information. For instance, the reason I do that, Ed, is I want to know, you can tell an awful lot about what's going on at an institution by taking those attorneys' billings, and they have to do it on, for every minute they're on the telephone and so forth, and they have to write down what that billing was for. And over the last 2 years since I've been at this with Ed, then things have gone from specifically this person filed this Public Information Act request, and this we were investigating, and we were perusing that to see if it could be turned over to the requester by Del Mar College.
It turned out to be a full paragraph.
Yeah, and then now it says is conversation with the president about personnel matters. I mean, give me a break, folks. And then a lot of that, they keep saying they have to redact things. That's when they white it out or black it out, whatever you want to call it, because it's attorney-client privilege. Now, here I am trying to obtain information about the legal aspects and what's going on at Del Mar College with these massive attorney bills, a lot of them out of town, like the city does. And all I'm trying to figure out is where is my money going? What's happening over there? And then the attorneys just smoke screen it and delay it, and well, we're going to ask for an opinion from the Attorney General. Well, that costs you money from the Attorney General's point of view, because you're paying for that organization to go over what should be just released. And then you never hear anything after that. But I don't care if they redact the usual stuff like social security numbers, account numbers, credit card numbers, addresses, and that type of thing.
We have no interest in that.
No, I couldn't care less. But they say, well, we have to do this, and then they charge you per page for redaction, and they charge you to copy this, that, and the other. And I haven't had the ridiculous $26.7 million that Ed got as an estimate one time, but I guess I ought to be working on it.
Well, I'm proud of that, because I've gotten press coverage out of as far away as Fort Worth on that.
That's right, yeah. And that was Associated Press too, so
That
that's
was.
no telling how far that went.
That one's probably not over.
No, I don't think that's over at all. It's a classic example. So I'm just tired of having people ignore me when I'm legally entitled to certain documentation, and then they have to go whine into the Attorney General's office to find out if it's within limits and so forth and so on. And that's very costly, folks. So that's why I'd like to knock down that cost.
And we have been looking at that firm up in Austin that runs up a pretty decent bill every month.
Yeah.
And probably because they're rated as #1 firm in Austin.
Yeah.
Very, very well respected firm. But early on, we were able to get some bills that, although redacted, you could tell that they were doing a lot of work for Del Mar College, representing them with the Board of Nursing, the Texas Board of Nursing.
Right.
And we're kind of curious as to how that's progressing.
Mm-hmm.
We think there's something going on, but the last time you asked for an invoice, I mean, they want to redact the whole thing.
Okay.
And what really piqued our interest in that were comments that were made in a public forum.
Mm-hmm.
At a hearing, these people weren't under oath, but in a public forum, you would hope that professionals wouldn't be lying.
Mm-hmm.
So we looked at them. I'm going to cut. Okay, doctor, during some testimony, we saw the current chair of the nursing program on the witness stand. And again, she wasn't under oath. But the question was started out, did you ever have any issue where a patient's health was compromised under the direction of, and a person's name? No, not that, no. Do you recall an incident where Mylanta was introduced into a patient intravenously, causing the patient to be sent to critical condition and ultimately resulted in patient death under this person's care? No. That's the answer from the chair. You have no recollection of that? The chair says, no, I do not. The question from the attorney, was this person ever submitted to the Board of Nursing for peer review or for termination for cause based on any incident involving compromising patient care for introducing Mylanta inappropriately into the system? There's some objections. And then the chair says, well, it wasn't, first of all, it wasn't that person. You know. Student that I said that I can recall, that particular incident was, and again, if I can recall, this was actually a student who was, when we had our E-line program, she was doing clinical and she was under the direction of a faculty that has already resigned. She's no longer in the department. Doc, we went from no, I don't recall, to the next page where it seems like she's recalling. Okay, well.
What a change. 15 minutes makes, huh?
It wasn't even 15. So there's some more questioning, and the chair says that faculty has since retired. Okay. Well, that indicates to me that there was a faculty,
Right.
and there was a patient that was administered some kind of drug intravenously that suffered terminally from it.
Right. Passed away.
So there was a death of the patient. Okay.
Yeah, Mylanta in the veins probably do that.
That slowed the blood down.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, here we've got a different person up. And this would be the former chair. She's testifying, again, not under oath. And the attorney says, yesterday, an issue was described with regard to patient safety, where the use of Mylanta in an IV resulted in patient death. The patient died. Comparing that to another situation, was the faculty member responsible for or overseeing that subjected to termination for cause? Was that faculty subjected to termination for cause proceeding to your knowledge? And the answer from the former chair is, I didn't have a faculty member that participated in that particular action that you're talking about. So it seems like she's got knowledge as to what that thing was. So the attorney says, so were there Del Mar students who were providing care to that patient? The answer, I think I remember the incident you're speaking about. I do not remember that it was Mylanta.
Okay.
I do not remember exactly how it was given or whatever. There was a Del Mar student involved. But if it's the case I'm remembering, it is a student that was working under a preceptor, an unline student working under a preceptor. And they go on to explain that. And the attorney then says, and who was that faculty member? Well, she gave the name of a faculty member. It's actually a retired military person. And it's public testimony, but I'm not going to read that name.
No, we don't.
And I'm not going to read it because I don't think that person did it.
No.
That name was given, and I sent her the transcript.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the attorney, attorneys can be pretty vicious.
Mm-hmm.
This attorney went on, he said, where there's a patient death, is it required to report to the Texas Board of Nursing? So what he's saying is, your patient died, are you required to report that to the Board of Nursing? The answer from the former chair, who is a PhD, well, we don't know that was the cause of the patient's death. The patient's death occurred sometime after the incident, and the patient had multiple issues. So no, I'm not aware of that.
Well, I think an investigation should have been conducted. And, where's the pathology report?
That's an awfully good question. I'm not a scientist, but I know that you don't put Mylanta or any other drug directly into the vein.
No.
And have the patient die and say, well, that looks like a natural death.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, essentially what they said was the patient was going to die anyway.
And that's a true statement.
Yeah, well, 20 years, 30 years down the road, that's a kind of a wishy-washy answer there.
Yeah.
So.
Wow.
Yeah.
So this testimony, which again, it wasn't under oath, but you wouldn't think they would lie to incriminate themselves or any other person for this kind of thing. This testimony was public. It indicates to me we were both sitting there.
Right.
So we heard it directly. And I've read it and reread it, and I'm convinced by reading it that a patient died at the hands of a student of Del Mar.
Right.
I'm convinced of that, and that's all public information. The patient died. It was a student at Del Mar College that administered the drug incorrectly. There were nurses involved,
Right.
Preceptor, clinical supervisor. I'm not clear on that,
Right.
and they weren't real clear.
No, well, that's called a bob and weave, I think,
And
when you get into that.
and we've got a dead patient that, isn't that manslaughter? I'm not sure.
Well,
It may be. I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not a natural death.
no, well, there's something similar, and I'll just introduce this into the fray at Del Mar College. Del Mar College, in order, they said, to save money, fired about 20 custodians that were full-time custodial staff. They were members of our community here. They had benefits and so forth. They had families, and they cared about the condition of the buildings over there. I mean, the person we had in our science building, you could eat off the floors, folks. And that man was perpetual motion all day long, every minute he was there. But in order to save money, it was said, then they hired this contractor out of Ohio, I think it is. And now we've got pretty much part-time people, minimum wage people that are over there working. Now, in my laboratory, the person that I had over there full-time knew if something looked wrong, he'd come and get me and go down and say, hey, is this supposed to be in this shape? What's this liquid that's leaking on the floor? You know, I knocked over this bottle. Have I done something that is hazardous to everyone? And we cleaned it up, you know. But he at least had the good sense to come and ask me or one of the other chemists over there or biologists to find out what was going on. Then with this custodial service, I said, I can't have untrained people in here. Now, we were told by the custodial service that they were going to train their custodians to clean at hospital standards, okay? Now, I guess if I went to southern Borneo somewhere out in the jungle and looked up one of those outpost clinics out there, it may be, you know, in the same shape. So we had a heck of a time getting our buildings clean. Now, the bottom line was, and this is to your point on manslaughter, there was a graduate student at UCLA out in California, and she went into the laboratories, and she ignited a fire in there and burned herself up, killed her. Now, what happened at that, you'd think that the family and all could file civil lawsuits against that, because that's the standard fare. But what the district attorney out there did is he threw a real curveball at UCLA, and he charged the president of UCLA and this gal's professor with criminal charges, okay, which was manslaughter. Okay? And, you know, that was just unheard of. So when I read that, and then we had this change in custodial service, I said, I'm not going to have a part-timer who can't spell chemistry in my laboratory around not only the chemicals, but the biologicals. We've got bacterial cultures, fungal cultures and stuff that can be real dangerous if they're broken or mishandled. And I said, no way. So I have a picture on the front of the school newspaper at the top of the fold, more than half the front page, where I've got my own private mop bucket over there and I'm mopping the floors up. And there was a big article in that paper about that. And then that made all the administration people, you know, very unhappy. But I can't have somebody go in there and harm themselves because nobody will train those people. And I used to have to watch the full-time staff and you know, tell them, I'd say, you know, you need to just leave this alone and don't do that, don't throw this out. Now, what further enforced that was right in the beginning, I set up some laboratories on a Monday night for 8 o'clock lab the next morning, and I went into that lab and they didn't heed my stay out sign, and they had gone in there and they took all of my equipment off of the lab benches that were set up for the next day's laboratory, and they threw them out. To this day, I don't know where that equipment and that paperwork got off to. I have no clue. And that's when I said absolutely no, and I hit the ceiling. I said, I don't want anybody in there.
My Lord.
You know, so, you know, and then we're not saving money. We're paying that company, I think for the 3 campuses we've got, it's something like $82,000 per month for custodial services.
Round numbers, $1 million a year to clean.
Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And, you know, I don't think that they spent that much on full timers. And then they're paying the grounds. They had a groundskeeper come in. Okay, they fired 5 or 6 groundskeepers that were full-time employees at Delmar College. And I think the minimum I've ever seen per month to that out-of-town groundskeeping system is about $13,000.
That's the norm. Then there's some. If they need a palm tree,
Oh, yeah.
There's additional.
Yeah, and you know, I mean, and then you see a limb down somewhere, and you call, well, that's not in our contract. That's going to be extra. And the custodial service does the same thing.
And you've got clover fields out there now.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
I've been to the campus.
Right.
I don't work a lot in my yard, but I wouldn't allow it to get like that.
No.
So we've got, you were facing potential danger by being a professor.
Right.
And so you were proactive and made certain that
That's right.
you lock your door.
Mm-hmm.
Don't
And
let
it's
people
got
in.
signs on it, do not enter, do not clean, and leave it alone. So, And then as soon as this semester is out mid-May, I'll be in there scrubbing those floors again and waxing and so forth and so on. But I can't have somebody getting hurt in there and then have the new president set that I'm gonna be charged not only with civil, but criminal charges.
Can't afford either.
No.
And now we've got a patient that died, and we're not attorneys, we're not legal professionals,
That's true.
but we know the patient died, that's what they said. And I can tell you, to the best of my knowledge, nothing has been done. And I say that because I sent the transcripts to the district attorney, and they said they don't have jurisdiction. The patient died in corpus, and the district attorney has no jurisdiction over it. So I sent it to the state police.
Yeah.
I sent it to every law enforcement agency in Texas. And I got back correspondence from every one of them. It's not in our jurisdiction.
Right.
So we know the patient died. It was a medication error, and the patient died. Somebody made the medication error, and nobody so far wants, with any law enforcement authority, wants to prosecute.
Well, I can't believe the Board of Nursing ignores it, because their charge in life, their responsibility is to make sure that nurses are safe and protect the public.
Now, we've not heard from the Board of Nursing.
Well,
So-
that's true.
So we did send this together with some audio tapes to the Board of Nursing, and that was a long time ago.
Okay.
And that's one of the reasons we want that invoicing from the Austin law firm, is because historically, they've spent a lot of money negotiating something, apparently, with the Board of Nursing.
Mhm.
We would like to see if that's got anything to do with this.
Right.
They're doing something, or they have done it in the past,
Right.
because we've gotten the first page of a redacted bill, and it was $7,000 or so, and everything was redacted. So something was going on there. We don't know if it's continuing or not, but we will keep you updated. Now, on that contract, at $82,000 a year,
Mhm.
that seems like a lot of money. And I want to explain a little activity that may not even be related to that, but it's something that goes on all the time. It's called gratuity.
Mhm.
Now, you know, when you leave a restaurant, you leave your gratuity,
Right.
okay? That's perfectly normal. Now, if you work for the government and you have a side deal with somebody on the outside, and let's say, for instance, I'm in the purchasing department, and I want to get a contract executed, and I say, I will execute that contract for you, but there needs to be a little bit in there for me.
Mhm.
And maybe you don't want to be an embezzler, but you'd like to have something that gave you incentive to execute that contract. Now, what they can do, and what happens all the time in government, is that they can say, hey, well, we're going to execute this contract, and we'll both win on this thing. When you retire in 2 years, why don't you come become a vice president for my firm?
Mhm.
That's called a gratuity.
Right.
Now, that's a felony.
Okay.
So, and it may or may not apply to anything that we see in Del Mar.
Mhm.
But when you told me about, or when you mentioned that contract, I said, contracts are exposed to this gratuity thing all the time.
Mhm.
People go to jail for that all the time.
Mhm.
Now, I haven't seen many people go to jail in Corpus, but I have a lot of business in the Rio Grande Valley,
Mhm.
and the feds have really cracked down on the Rio Grande Valley.
Oh, really?
A lot of former sheriffs are now current federal prisoners.
Oh.
And they had one judge that, unfortunately, he went down as well. One of the attorneys jumped off the bridge and committed suicide.
Mm.
So there was a lot of, there is a lot of activity down there trying to clean up the corruption.
Right.
And it's taken the federal government to get involved.
Mhm. Well,
And unfortunately, I've gone to all the state agencies. Now, I can't say there's any corruption at all. I haven't got any documentation that would prove that.
Right.
So I've gone and said, and because I can't get my documents.
Mhm.
It takes time and again. I have to file a PIA, and honestly, I've been told you already got it when the person that told me that knew I hadn't gotten it.
Right.
So, but the Attorney General was very helpful in that one.
Yeah, well, we need to cease the runarounds, folks.
But that gratuity thing happens all the time. Somebody needs to look into that. Are these contracts fair? And that's why we're doing this.
Okay. So the people that were in charge of granting that contract, if one of them wound up associated with that particular firm out of Ohio, would
That would be an indicator. All right. Clearly, maybe he's just a good guy and they really wanted to hire him. You never know.
right?
But that's why the FBI exists. One of the reasons. And are they involved yet? We don't
I
know.
don't know. I guess we could ask the question.
Well, I don't think they have an obligation to tell us. But we can ask anyway.
Yeah.
But so we've seen that all large organizations, particularly government ones, are susceptible to accounts receivable lapping
Mhm.
and gratuity.
Right.
These sort of things happen all the time. And it's because of a lack of fiduciary responsibility.
Mhm.
The officers, the directors, in this case, the Board of Regents, they all have a fiduciary responsibility to us,
That's right.
the taxpayers. We may only pay individually $600 or $700 a year to Delmar,
Mhm.
but there's a whole lot of us
That's right.
paying $90 million,
Mhm.
and that's a really big number.
Right.
Uh,
And, you know, some of that comes from the state too, so you've got the entire state tax-paying public involved, and some of it's federal. So, you know, there are an awful lot of taxpayers involved in running Delmar College because it's totally a taxpayer-supported entity. And tuition, they say, oh, the tuition goes in there. Folks, that's not a drop in the bucket compared to the $90 million.
I think it's about 12%,
You know, right,
but I'm not clear, based on the records I've seen, how much of that ever gets collected.
right.
So
So we couldn't get the green cards on the student.
I can tell you that didn't get collected.
Default either.
5 foot of bad debt did not get collected.
No.
We know that for certain.
So, I don't know, it's, I guess we're just gonna have to keep up the good chase, so to speak.
We're not gonna quit, and we can only do as much as you and I can do,
Right,
but what we can do is enlist the law enforcement agencies, which we have done.
right.
The state controller, those people, they've got an audit section, and I looked at the credentials of those people, and that's impressive.
Mhm.
They've got a lot of CPAs that are also certified fraud examiners.
Right.
These people know what they're doing.
Mhm.
We'll continue to communicate with them. The Attorney General, we're like pen pals with them.
Yeah,
Uh,
well, I may have to go to Austin one of these Fridays and meet Mr. Paxton and see what goes on. I mean, I was almost on a first name basis, it seemed like, right? Greg Abbott.
I think they had a slang from whenever they got your letter in.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, there were several words said, you know, like, oh my goodness, not him again. Or something to that effect.
Something close. But again, the Attorney General, they got some really good people. I've chatted with them on the phone, and I mean prompt.
Yeah.
Those guys, they see like the 26.7 million.
Yeah.
It wasn't the next day
Mhm.
that they had a letter faxed into
Right.
emailed into the college.
Right.
And all of a sudden, roadblocks started getting lifted.
Yeah, well, you just gotta know where that pressure point is, I guess.
And it's unfortunate that that is part of the reason for the administrative bloat down there.
Mhm.
And it is administrative bloat.
Oh, yeah.
When enrollment goes down 18%,
Mhm.
professor salaries get tilted from 60 to 40% of the total budget, there's something wrong.
Yeah.
There's something wrong. And then, I just need to mention this as well, that the CFO doesn't have an accounting background.
No, not at all.
We can't find that he's had an accounting course. And then the controller, which would be the second man in charge of the finances over there, of the accounting system, he couldn't pass the CPA exam. And then the internal auditor,
Non-existent.
oh, hold it, there is no internal auditor. So we've got an internal control system that appears to have some weaknesses, and no compensating control in the internal auditor. If it were my college, it is my college,
Yeah.
but I don't have any authority over it.
Right.
If I had authority over that college, if I were on the board of regents, I would insist on hiring 3 CPAs that hopefully at least one of them was a certified fraud examiner,
Right.
and see what's going on. And I'm saying that because of the documents that we found that are horrible.
Mm-hmm.
I have never seen anything that bad come out of the accounting system. Our subledger doesn't balance. We had a little problem converting data, and some of it got lost. I opened the file drawer and there weren't any,
Mm-hmm.
so let's write it off. What in the world?
Yeah. And then,
You know-
we had a problem. We don't know what it was, and we can't figure it out, but we had a problem.
So if you were a small business and your accounting system was run that way,
Mm-hmm.
what would you be? What would be the one word that you would be? Bankrupt.
That's right. Or non-existent.
History.
That's right, history.
Well, Doc, I think we've covered a great deal today.
Okay.
And most of it's theoretical. Now, we did read from some transcripts, so that's public information.
Mhm.
We do not know if there's any problems at all with Del Mar.
Right, but we'd like to find out.
We know that these memos indicate there's issues,
Mhm.
but we can't, we're having a great deal of difficulty getting
Right.
any information to support them. So we will continue. The letters are going off in the mail tonight. People, email us, call us, let us know. We're concerned. If you have any knowledge, please pass it on. We will use it. If you need it confidential, we'll keep it confidential. We don't care. We can take the heat.
That's right.
Doctor, thank you so much.
Thank you, Ed.
Document we're viewing now is labeled 2011 write-off, Note 2, CE conversion balance prior to 610. This document was obtained as a result of our last PIA request, and this is the second document that we have seen that references the 2010 accounts receivable conversion. Please note on here that these entities all appear to be taxpayer supported. Their accounts receivable for Del Mar, that is an asset of Del Mar's. These people appear to have owed Del Mar money, so they were in the accounts receivable subledger, apparently prior to the conversion. Now, the note reads that shortly after the conversion, the department experienced a change in personnel. These accounts didn't make the conversion into the new system, and they had a change in personnel, and they were unable to provide any support for the outstanding balances that are still reflected. So what that's telling me, and my interpretation is, that prior to the accounts receivable conversion, these receivables existed in the subledger. Subsequent to the conversion, in the new subledger, they were nowhere to be found. That indicates to me, and let me explain after I tell you what that indicates, what my background is, so that I am qualified, and I want for you to feel comfortable that I have qualifications to understand this. That indicates to me that the conversion failed. A conversion of any accounting records requires strict internal controls. And an internal control is what is normally understood as checks and balances. So as an example, before the conversion, if the total accounts receivable equaled $1 million, after the conversion, the total accounts receivable should also equal $1 million. Now, prior to the conversion, if there were 1,000 subledger accounts, after the conversion, there should also be 1,000 subledger accounts. That is a standard internal control for any conversion. The number before has to equal the number after, and every subledger before the conversion must equal every subledger after the conversion, or it's a failed conversion. Okay, in this respect, the 2010 Delmar accounts receivable conversion. This is the second note that we have found from an accounting department employee. The first one was from the controller, the college controller. This one is authored by the CFO. Both memos reference what would be termed a failed conversion. So it appears that the internal controls were not in place to successfully convert the accounts receivable system. Now, let's think about that. These people have a fiduciary responsibility over the assets, both the cash and the assets, of the college, which is taxpayer supported. Fiduciary responsibility in and of itself requires an internal control system that's functioning. The two memos that we have found so far indicate a lack of internal controls, which I interpret as a lack of fiduciary responsibility. Now, why am I qualified to say that? Because of my background, both education and experience. I studied accounting in the 70s at the University of Houston. I have an undergraduate in accounting, business administration, concentration in accounting. My graduate degree is a Master's of Science in accountancy. I did pass the CPA exam just prior to graduating with my master's degree. And at that time, there were 8 large accounting firms that offered the best, or it was considered the best by most people in the industry, experience for post-education. So anyone that would spend 1 or 2 years at any of those 8 international accounting firms really supplemented their educational experience, and their value in the open market increased subsequently as a result. Now, I went in with a class of 10 people. Most of them left after a year and prior to 2 years. I was the last of those 10 to leave. I stayed 3.5 years. It was extremely good experience, not necessarily fun, but I learned a lot. I focused on public companies. That would be SEC reporting companies. So we had to comply, or the companies had to comply with the SEC requirements. Very stringent. So I'm used to compliance. I'm used to having a fiduciary responsibility. The shareholders held the management responsible for their assets of the stock exchange companies, the publicly traded companies. In this respect, the taxpayers are holding the management of the college responsible. They have a fiduciary responsibility. The management of the college has a fiduciary responsibility to the taxpayers of the county or the taxing district. And here, this is the second memo we found that indicates a lack of internal controls and what I would consider a lack of fiduciary responsibility. this memo is authored by the CFO, and it's written to the college president. So apparently all of the Del Mar College management was aware of the lack of internal controls and the effect that it had on the fiduciary responsibility that they are obligated with. Okay, I'm going to pull up another memo. As I mentioned, Dr. Sansang is off today, doing a lot of other work, including helping a former student. And this former student is one of his success stories. He has many. She now is called Doctor. That's the kind of work that man does. He takes pride in his students' success. Let's look at this initial memo that I got when we started looking into the accounts receivable write-offs. We wrote for an explanation of a handful of general ledger accounts, and as for the explanation, all I wanted, and it's described very well in the letter. All I wanted was a general ledger detail for a handful of accounts. Well, in response to that, Miss McDonald wrote me this letter, dated September 11th. She said they could provide that information, but it would cost me almost $27 million, and there would be 105 million documents. Just on the face, that seemed absurd, and the question is, or it was at the time, is why would they do this? Were they trying to prevent me from finding something? And I concluded very quickly that they probably were. Now, what is that something? Well, as we go further, and we have to take this accounting system apart piece by piece, we start at the top with the financial statements, and you'll see some of them here. I'm going to post this all on the web page so that it'll be much more easily followed. We start with the financial statements and work our way down into the detail. In the financial statements, they say they wrote off. These are audited financial statements. Del Mar says they wrote off $2.838 million of accounts receivable during the 7-year period. So we started looking at this and said, what are they writing off? Well, Dr. Sansang sent in the initial PIA request, which he received a 5-foot stack of documents. They were very responsive. Now, fortunately, contained within that 5-foot stack of documents were 3 documents that indicated they'd written off, Del Mar College had written off as uncollectible approximately $185,000 of third-party receivables. And we started looking at those third parties, and we recognized them. They were very prominent members of society, including taxpayer-supported entities. As an example, Kingsville, Texas A&M Kingsville, owed Del Mar College $54,000, which apparently they didn't pay, and Del Mar never collected, so they wrote it off as an uncollectible. That didn't make any sense to us. It did not make sense. So we started going down further into the detail, and to get there, we have to request information from Del Mar. And it should be publicly available. There's laws out there that say it is. So I asked for this handful of general ledger details. And to verify that I wasn't asking for too much, I tested this on a client's accounting system, which should be larger than the Del Mar accounting system. It took approximately 17 minutes to produce these documents. Well, Del Mar, Miss McDonald from Del Mar wrote me back that it would take over 100 man-years, produce 105 million documents, and cost me approximately $27 million to obtain this information. Well, I sent that off to the Attorney General and called the local news affiliate, KRIS. They have what I would categorize as a first-class investigative reporting team. And that team is basically 2 members, Rick and Andrew.
They both have done a magnificent job of investigating not only this, but many things that appear corrupt throughout the area. So they went down to ask Delmar why it would cost $27 million. That show is public information. Delmar initially said there was a mathematical mistake. They backpedaled a little bit. But the bottom line was that after meeting with their outside counsel, and we had a public meeting because we requested it, the outside counsel negotiated to come up with less than 200 pages to fulfill my request. Now, I didn't change my request, and he did a fine job. He was given a real quagmire, and he's outside counsel. He's paid. They paid him to resolve this, and resolve it he did. Now, should it have been involved, or should it have gotten to the point that he had to be involved? I wouldn't think so. But it appears that this is a roadblock to what we've been finding. And what have we been finding? We've been finding internal documents that indicate there was a lack of internal controls and assets have been lost. The assets are in this case, accounts receivable to Delmar. Now, these college managers, these executives, have a fiduciary responsibility to protect the assets, yet they've been lost. And we're now finding it out only through a series of PIA requests. So, was this an attempt to block me from finding that information? In my opinion, I think it certainly was. We're going to find out. Again, I will post this information on the webpage, and we'll start posting the webpage on the lead into the show as well. We're going to go on to the next documents.